improvised music versus jazz versus. If you can give us a little overview of what you do.
Well, I mostly play improvised music. I definitely, I'm somebody where it was a little bit easier for me to. I studied classical bass and I studied jazz, and there was a time when I was first starting out where I didn't really, where jazz wasn't, straight ahead jazz playing wasn't an interest to me, but
Mm-hmm.
it was easier for me to just get enough of it under my belt than to explain why I didn't want to do it. I just learned how to the basic mechanics of jazz bass playing, and I know a bunch of tunes and that sort of thing. And quickly I found out, I suppose being in America, I live in America, so I was
Mm-hmm.
coming up in the Bay Area, and so within my interests, the best players often had a jazz background. So that sort of sunk in pretty quickly, and I fell into a gig. Bass players have this, like, the what I call the bass player dumb luck, where
Mm-hmm.
you play bass and you've been playing for a couple years, and all of a sudden you're on stage with Marshall Allen from Sun Ra's band. Marshall Allen wants to play Prelude to a Kiss. I want to play Prelude to a Kiss with Marshall Allen.
Yeah.
I don't want to play Prelude to a Kiss at a steakhouse. Well, maybe if I was getting a really good steak, depending on, that's not my
Depends
angle.
how
But
depends how they sweeten the pot.
yeah, exactly. So I really got a lot of it under my belt because I wanted to play with these musicians. When I was coming up in the Bay Area, there were the people where called EAI or whatever, but I'm also interested in sort of one of the things about improvised music is you get three people together and figure out the sort of the best and the most interesting thing the three of you could do right then.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at everyone's background and everyone's skills, and you try to cut to the best thing you can do.
The
And
common
so
denominator.
and so with that sort of thing in mind, when I was coming up, there were just a lot of the great older free jazz guys around. Glenn Spearman was there in the Bay Area, and a lot of the great drummers. This guy named Donald Robinson played a lot with, like, Rafe Malik and these guys, and Marco Aniti was sort of one of my great teachers, and he was coming out of the Jimmy Lyons School, played with Don Cherry, Bill Dixon, and Cecil Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
John Shakai was around. Eddie Gale was around, who made those great Blue Note records and played with Sun Ra and Cecil Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those guys were around, and I wanted to be able to interact with them. So that's where the jazz playing came from, and what I sort of the guy I knew who was really good at playing straight ahead, we would go play at the train station, because the weather there, you can play year round outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go 5 days a week and just walk behind tunes and get it so that I could, have a handle on that language. And it's really helped out. But I think the bulk of my work, if you listen to a lot of the CDs maybe that I sent you,
Yes.
you're not going to hear a lot of that necessarily, except that, it's always pretty harmonically conscious, whatever I'm doing. There's always some kind of harmonic information going on in terms of, like, harmony, and
I've noticed that. Yes.
little bit of buried melody, even in the most abstract stuff, and that's just the way it is. I mean, some of the melodies are coming from Morton Feldman, so it's not even that it's like super melodic or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm most interested is in free improvisation, and probably we'll get into to where I came from the Bay Area. I moved to Houston, and then I came here. I'm in the Boston area, right outside of Boston and Quincy,
Mm-hmm.
which I think of as I live on the East Coast, and now I have access to the great East Coast musicians and gigs.
Boston has a wonderful set of free improvisation and open music.
I think what happens is, if we really think about it, right? If you think about it at a surface level, that's sort of surprising. But if we really consider it for a minute, people who bring tunes to the situation, they just want to play.
Yes.
They're not worried about structure. That's why they bring a structure, right? And full-time improvisers in the sort of the European tradition, or out of the Cecil Taylor school, are really interested in structure. Like, I see what material we bring and how that structures and how the form turns out and what kind of forms we come up with. That's a real interest to me. And people who, that one chord vamp thing that I was talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
even standards, that's sort of somebody who wants to play. They want to play over something. They're not really that worried about what sometimes when people do more complex uh, compositions that actually have different ideas for improvisation, I think it can get a lot more interesting. A lot of the AACM musicians, Roscoe, Anthony Braxton, Leo Smith, especially Wadada Leo Smith.
Yes, yes.
I'm not anti-composition. I listen to tons of it, and one of my favorites was the old Jerry Hemingway quintet uh, around the Marmalade King when he had Walter Werbos and Michael Moore and Ernst Reisinger and Mark Dresser. They really had some great spaces set up to improvise in, and I liked that, and great structures. But I think as an improviser, that's what my interest is what's the structure going to be, especially as a bass player,
Mm-hmm.
come in and try to create a structure, try to create a piece of music. And we have to worry about all of it when you're playing free. You can't just, well, the bass player's playing the vamp, there's the form.
Yes.
And then that's the only thought given to it, is handing the bass player an interesting set of an uninteresting set of 8 notes to play or whatever.
It's more of a communal thing where everyone listens to each other and molds the thing.
Yeah, and like a potluck too, or I think of it as like, instead of a conversation, it more of like a building. The electricians might not even talk to the plumbers when a building's happening until their lines are crossing or whatever, or they need to get around this thing, and then all of a sudden they've got to negotiate, and then they go off and do their own thing. Evan Parker uses a term called locking points.
Mm-hmm.
That you have these locking points, and in a lot of ways that goes right back to jazz, where
Yeah.
you have Charlie Parker taking off from one chord tone, going for a bit, landing on another. And in an improvisation, you have things like that too. These moments where we do have a meeting and decide about a certain thing. But there's just so much, and what happens is once there's, I feel like the international community of improvised music is always looking at different issues. There's a time when, well, everything's so loud. Well, let's work on this quiet music for a couple decades, see what happens. Well, now we all know how to do that. What do we do next? We don't end together very well. Well, let's figure that out. All of a sudden, we're all ending together all the time. It gets to be a little trite. The drummer takes a solo to end the piece finally, things like that. And there just ends up being, and I think now we're still, the one thing that we've struggled with in the music, the hardest thing to do is to really maintain independence. And I think that's still a goal that we're working on, to be able to create something with, in a trio or whatever, however many people are in the band, a quartet,
Mm-hmm.
quintet, 5 independent ideas going at once that make sense together. I still think that's a pretty big goal that we're still after. And there's always something, which is what makes it so interesting. It's really.
So it would seem like you would work out, like if you play with a group regularly, you have worked out a language, a dialogue with them, and that would make it easier, the ability to go further.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's somebody like a drummer, or in Houston, it was around the trombone player David Dove and the guitar player Sandy Ewan, and often not together, mostly not together, usually different with each of them. And then we'd talk through these ideas, and it would be, it wouldn't really stop a rehearsal too much and go into it, or even have that much rehearsal, and mainly would just be, oh, we're doing this all the time, let's think about these things. And it might just be over like some beers or whatever that it would come up, or, in the banter before or after a show. And that's how the music develops, I think, in that way. A lot of times it's talking about it and analyzing it, thinking about where the weak spots are and stuff like that.
Your personal vocabulary, your personal language, it's obvious you've had classical training because you're getting some of those tones, those sounds. But it's a lot of it isn't notes. A lot of it's other sounds that you're getting from the bass. And I just wanted you to, if you could talk about the language you're using and how it fits with, and I'm sorry, I forget her name, Ewan.
Sandy Ewan, yeah.
Sandy Ewan. She uses a not necessarily tonal, but just talk about how things work out with that kind of sound you're using.
Well, when I got to Houston, the thing about her playing is it's completely original, and it's really, she really has a special thing that she figured out that's really all hers. And I thought, well, I want to work with this, and she was picking up on certain things that I was working with in my solo music that in the Bay Area right before I moved to Houston in 2010. And I was doing things with a laptop with a lot of similar textures to what she was doing, getting out of the guitar, and in addition to the bass. And I sort of lost the laptop. I had a wood floors in my apartment in Houston, and the bass just took over. And I love my recordings that have that on there, but that have my laptop stuff. But I was mostly working with field recordings and repitching them and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
but
saw a couple of the videos that were on YouTube of that.
yeah, I'm not, and I like I like what I did, but I'm just not doing it now. But the sounds with the bass, just exploring the sounds you can get and looking at the people like Barry Guy and Joel Leandra and Peter Koval, William Parker, and people like that, and Martin Altena maybe. And there's a lot of interesting German bass players that I got the sounds from, that I got certain ideas from, Torsten Mueller and Hans Schneider, people who aren't on everybody's radar, but really great players. Torsten, well, they have a thing that this German generation that's like after Kowald and stuff like that, Torsten Mueller and Hans Schneider, and there's a guy named Philip and Wiesbaden, and they had a very interesting approach that's sort of non-resonant. And that was very important in contrast to the next person that I'll talk about that's very important, which is Mark Dresser is really the important person, because it's not just his playing, which is fabulous, right? He's one of the great living bass players, 5 or 6 great living bass players of all time, but he wrote down a lot of the math behind how to get these sounds and because of his study and his research, he figured out things I'd never figure out, but he hands me a piece of paper on it and I see it and it's like, oh, I got it. Perfect. Thanks. And you can just go to work with it and start moving it around and taking it to the next place. And he really set up a way. So a lot of these sounds are a lot more portable. What happened is you'd find the sound and it would just be where you found it before Dresser. Once Dresser started figuring out how all these things are coming together, how the strings behaving, how the bow's behaving, how the harmonics are building up, and where to get them, he opened up a whole thing where it's just you can move these sounds around a lot more. You can be a lot more precise with them harmonically.
He's developing a literacy instead of an unwritten language.
Exactly, and then what you do with that is you're always pushing to the edge of what you don't know. So I sort of take his stuff and I start monkeying around with it and getting it to where I can get it to a new place, and I find my sounds, and I'm not writing mine down. So it's still pushing beyond what I know. It's just you're making the starting point, the knowledge behind the starting point is building up more and more. And Dresser's research has really been unbelievable. And you just, and to confront somebody like Sandy Ewan, who's got these, she's an architect and a really good musician. She can sing standards. She played in a rock band. And so her sounds are very complex and personal. And to come up against that, not just to match them, but to find something equally complex to go against it. His research really helped a lot, because there's, you're hearing a sound in a whole different area, and you need to put there needs to still be an interesting harmonic component, because you're either, no matter what you're doing, no matter how abstract you're getting, you're either playing a unison or a harmony, right? Either there's 2 pitches or there's 1. You can't really get away from that, no matter how hardcore you want to go. Some of the non-resonant stuff that these guys like Torsten Mueller do, you can get into where it's just a sound, but even still, a tuner would tell you that it was a note, just like a drum set, a drum set, those are all pitches at some level. So, that Dresser's research really helped that. And I think I pushed things into a more sort of harsh and more abstract territory than he usually goes in. So it's not just stealing his work or anything like that and playing like him. It's like he's the beautiful thing about what he's figured out is he'll hand you a thing to make you understand your own work more. It's not about what he's doing. And he had a teacher that did that too, this guy Bertram Turetsky. He was more of a new music player, but somebody I got to study with a bit too. And so he's kind of continuing that tradition, but he's doing it in the best way. And so that really helps to make these things, because one of the things I don't like in improvised music is too much development. I don't want to just start tossing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. I like to have people come in with an idea that's fully formed. It's not like there can't be development within the idea, but it's not like plink plunk and see how we can build it up. It's like, well, you put out something there can be variation in the area, but I like to find a place for my material rather than just wonder what's going to happen, you know. And I think that's why improvised music can be a great format for what I would call my music. You know, I don't think I'm not a Cagean person starting from absolute zero. And even Cage, when you dig in there, had a really complex harmonic language he was working with, and a lot of other structural and things like that. And where he was letting people have the variation was just the tip of the iceberg when you really get in there and start digging at John Cage's music. But yeah, I think that's maybe that was a roundabout answer to your question.
Balance Point Records, Balance Point Acoustics.
Yeah.
How does recording feedback into what you do? Because I saw there's a certain number of live albums, or not live albums, but live recordings, and I was wondering, does he just have like the recording equipment that he takes like every gig and sets up and plays, or what's
No, there'll be a lot of times those are at a place like at a festival or somewhere with a professional recording engineer. Or sometimes I would just do a recording. There's a place in Houston for a little bit where you could do a gig and a live recording in this studio, and people would pay a little bit more. It'd be a small audience.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yeah,
you could pay for the recording with the gig, and so I would do. That's how the Alvin Fielder duo thing came out, because I was, Alvin's not a young man. He's 81 now, and at that he was in his 70s. He'd already died twice by the time I met him. He was had a real medical issue with an allergic reaction to something in Flatland twice. He was in a coma. So, he would say, "Hey, we got to play together because I'm going to die." And, thankfully he's going strong now. But, I just thought, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. So every time he came to Houston, his daughter lived in Houston. So we'd either play a gig or do a recording or something. And in that time, the band, we were playing with a quartet, and the two guys in the quartet weren't available, Dave Dove and Jason Jackson. So we just did that duo, and it came out great. And a lot of times what I do with recordings is let them sit for a while.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, they're not current.
Yeah, I let it sit for a couple years, and it starts to nag at me. Then I'll start to put it out, or something will happen. Something will happen where, like that Alvin Fielder duo, I came up with the idea to get the cover drawing from Sven-Åke Johansson. He was on Machine Gun and for Adolf Sax and the early Broadsman records and stuff. And he does these beautiful little pencil drawings. I thought, if I get a drawing from that, it'll be really cool. Have drummer connection, it'll look good, and other things like that. So a lot of times the recording will come about because there's if you think about improvisation, you wouldn't really imagine this, but the titles are not always easy. So if a cover and a title concept comes up around a piece of music that you have recorded, that might push it to the front of the line to get released. So a lot of times I have recordings that are from a festival where they had really good recording equipment, or, somebody recorded the gig and they give it to me and then I keep thinking about it. Or in the Bay Area, I used to record with a guy named Scott Looney, who I played a lot with, and we'd organize recording sessions, and I have a pretty good archive of different things, and sometimes I can just go back in there and make an album of something I did a while ago. So I like doing that. I like thinking about older recordings, and I've been doing cassettes of reissuing my older albums on cassette.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Have you thought about doing vinyl at all, or?
Vinyl's just not. It's too expensive, and then if you think about it's just riddled with. I mean, I like vinyl, and I'm into it. I have the whole FMP catalog on vinyl. I have most pad art boxes. I've got the bunch of. I've got a huge collection of improvised music on vinyl, but carrying it around to sell it. Yeah. Because that's where it sells, is at the gig. Yeah. So I'm already carrying a bass. So when I've done vinyls, when I've been on them, they sell right away, but they're just really expensive. You're looking at $2,000 to do a project, and I could do 4 CD projects for that, and so it's ended up being CDs and digital for me for my output, and the tapes are not or they're not cheaper individually. Like the per item cost isn't cheaper, but you can do 50 that look totally professional and sound great.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where those have come in.
And
Is
people like the physical things.
Yeah, people like physical things. They don't like paying for air, And I know people will buy a tape from Bandcamp and just listen to the download, put the tape on the shelf, maybe listen to it, and that's fine. And I'm into that. I mean, I like to have the objects myself too. Uh, I'm not teaching as much right now, so I'm trying to go back into the digital music a little bit better because it's a lot cheaper. But I definitely like CDs myself for the car and for the apartment. I like to put on a CD and listen to it, or an LP. But I like the object. I like to look at the liner notes, look at the art and everything. And so I try to care for that with my label.
I do my radio show all from digital, but around home I always play CDs and that kind of thing.
I mean, the digital music thing, it's there's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuances to it. It's been good and bad for all of us. There's somebody like me has a much wider reach than I ever did when I was making CDs.
Mm-hmm.
People all over the world can hear what I'm doing if they're interested, and so you can get it out there more. You can also one of the things I talk about as a listener. You're buying CDs or LPs at $15 each, and if somebody makes a bad one, they're off the list.
Yeah.
You're not getting another $15. I'm really into the objects, and I did kind of recommit to CDs recently. I really like the sound quality and the artwork and all that stuff. And LPs would be great, but they just haven't come down in their manufacturing price. And my albums sell, so I don't get stuck with boxes of them.
Mm-hmm.
I fit in a small closet in a 1-bedroom apartment. So, but I don't know, just putting and improvised music. It's one of those things where you're a lot easier. When you see me at a show, got a huge table with 25 albums or 30 albums on it, because you're a lot more likely to have somebody buy.
Yeah, someone who isn't going to see that anywhere else, and it's like, oh, here they are. I'll get this one and this one and this one.
Exactly, and you have that person versus 4 people buying one. Right. And so to think about one project, putting that much money into, and you're not really going to sell 4 of them to different people. You can sell the improvised music. People are, oh yeah, I want that and that and that. And so, or if you, I notice when I do sell multiple things, it's all different stuff. It's not like somebody's just going to come and sell out all the Koval duo cassettes. It's like, no, it's going to be one person going to buy that, one person's going to buy another thing.
I've also been a big fan of Henry Kaiser's for a long time. But
Kaiser was one of the first people I played an improv gig with.
Really?
He was 4 or 5. He lived down the street from where I did my first improv series.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one that I did was with Marco Aniti and Gino Robert, great drummer from the Bay Area. Played with a couple people, and then I played with Kaiser. Gino Robert Kaiser and a bass player named George Kermashi, who's in the Czech Republic now, really strong, great bass player. But Henry's just been, a close friend and a mentor through the whole thing. So it's basically in the Bay Area. It was great because I had those free jazz guys like I was talking about on the one side, and then Kaiser, who
is all over the map.
He's all over the map, but he's really grounded in the blues, beef part, and free improvisation.
Yeah.
So he was really excited about my interest in all that history, John Stevens and Evan Parker and Brutzman and all that stuff. And he had, huge collections of that. So a lot of our work, Kaiser and I, our connection is there. So no matter how weird it gets, it's always grounded in sort of the connection of British improv. And that's kind of an interesting thing about he and I. Mm-hmm. But he's unbelievable. He's playing we did a gig in Vermont recently that was just outstanding.
I love that duo album that you, it's fairly recent, but that's.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the music that we worked on for a long time, because Kaiser would we would get gigs in a cafe and we'd just do this acoustic thing, and he would bring that. He's got that acoustic guitar, 7-string acoustic guitar, and the tone of it is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And so that's the album I actually always wanted to make with him, so I'm really glad we were able to do that, because it's just so beautiful. His playing is I mean, it's so strong and so powerful. And we used to play at this place that was like a macrobiotic cafe, and they would give you 10 dinners for a gig.
Oh God.
And so and it was really good food, and you know, it was healthy and stuff like that. And even though I'm you know, more excited about things like barbecue,
Yeah, I was thinking.
but you know, it was still at that time it was in my 20s, and a free meal was a free meal, you know.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of that kind of playing, and and it was just really amazing. And yeah, he's somebody that I just can't say enough great things about. And also, there's the big picture of working with him, where there's so many things I've learned and experienced that I just wouldn't have if I wasn't open to dealing with the things he would throw in front of me.
Hmm.
I don't know if you have that album we made with Ray Russell, The Celestial Squid.
Yes, I do actually.
That was a fun one. Yeah, that's a cool album. Michael
Yeah.
Manring on other bass, wonderful bass guitar player. And Weasel Walter and Sandy Ewan and I had played a quartet with Roscoe Mitchell the night before.
Hmm.
Pretty fun trip, actually, back to the Bay Area. But yeah, Kaiser is just totally amazing. And of course, we did the Werner Herzog soundtracks together, and he was able to get us in on that. We should be able to do some projects here pretty soon in the Northeast. We've got some ideas, and you know, he's going to come out and do it. No exact dates yet, but it'll